Before we go on the record, Michelle, are we good to go technology-wise? Are we streaming? Very good. All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Andrew French, Chair of the Kansas Corporation Commission, joined by my colleagues Commissioner Keene and Commissioner Keither. I am now convening the hearing on the unanimous partial settlement agreement in the matter of the application of Southern Pioneer Electric Company for approval to make certain revenue-neutral changes to its rate design, docket number 24-SPEE 415 TAR. I will start with the entries of appearance, beginning with Southern Pioneer.
Mr. Chairman, Trevor Wolf, Forest Line, from Southern Pioneer. With me today also is Lindsay Campbell, who's CEO of Southern Pioneer. And just speak up. Oh, sorry.
And you might make sure your microphone is on.
Lindsay Campbell, Chantry Scott, Brian Beecher, as well as Richard Mackey, who's outside consultant.
Very good. Just so everyone knows, I think the cameras are also attached to the microphones, so it's important that you turn the microphone on, one, so that people online hear you, but two, so the camera can find you. So we're still getting used to these in-person hearings. Now, entry of appearance from Curb.
Yes, Todd Love appearing on behalf of Curb. Also present is David Nickel, Consumer Counsel.
Air Products National Beef.
Good morning, Commissioners. It's an honor to be here. I like in person, you know. So even though I have a limited participation, I wanted to be here to participate and to be with the Commission and the colleagues. Jim Zakor of the Fulston firm on behalf of Air Products and National Beef. Thank you.
Morning, Mr. Zakura. And now finally, KCC staff.
Good morning. Carly Massentine and Kyler Weininger, representing Commission staff and the public generally.
All right. Good morning, Carly. Does staff have a recommendation regarding notice of this hearing?
Yes. Staff recommends a finding that notice was proper. KSA 77-518 requires the presiding officer to give written notice of an evidentiary hearing at least 10 days prior to the hearing. The Commission set forth a procedural schedule in this matter on January 18th, 2024, in which it set the evidentiary hearing for today's date and time. That order initially set the hearing to be conducted virtually. On March 5th, 2024, Southern Pioneer motioned the Commission to convert the hearing from virtual to in-person. The Commission issued an order on May 30th, 2024, converting today's hearing to be in-person at the Commission's offices with remote accessibility. Each of the above-mentioned documents were served to all parties in the docket, and the parties are represented and present here today, indicating notice was properly given.
Are there any objections to notice in this proceeding? Hearing none, I will find that notice is proper and the Commission has jurisdiction over this proceeding at this time and place. I want to start with some preliminary matters. Do the parties have any preliminary matters that they wish the Commission to address at this time? Hearing none, we will move on to the procedure for the hearing. First, before we move to opening statements, some of you may have heard it, but the court reporter has requested that we be very careful about introducing ourselves before we speak. I think she's got a listing of everybody's names and all the witnesses' names, but it would also be very helpful if you would just introduce yourself before you begin an examination and maybe introduce the witness. So with that, or if you're rising for an objection, might be helpful to introduce yourself. So with that, I don't believe I have anything further for the procedure. I do understand the parties wish to make opening statements. Southern Pioneer will go first, followed by Curb, Air Products, National Beef, and then staff. After opening statements, we will follow the order of witnesses that was agreed to in the pre-hearing conference. I do understand at the pre-hearing conference, Air Products, National Beef waived cross-examination and staff waived cross-examination on Southern Pioneer's witnesses. And I also understand the parties indicated they will not be making closing statements, but that we will have a procedural schedule that allows for post-hearing briefs. So if I've misstated anything within that procedure, please let me know. Otherwise, that is the commission's understanding at this time. With that, we will move on to opening statements, beginning with Southern Pioneer and Mr. Wolford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May I use the podium or?
You may.
Good morning. Okay, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. My name is Trevor Wolford. I'm from the Morris Lang Law Firm, and I represent Southern Pioneer Electric Company. With me today are Lindsay Campbell, CEO of Southern Pioneer, Chantry Scott, Southern Pioneer's Executive Vice President and Assistant CEO, CFO, Brian Beecher. He's the company's Ops and Engineering Manager. And then Richard Mackey, who's Vice President of Economics, Rates, and Business Planning for Power System Engineering. We do thank you for your time and consideration. Southern Pioneer is a unique electric utility, one of a kind, actually. It's a nonprofit corporation wholly owned by Pioneer Electric, a nonprofit distribution cooperative. Southern Pioneer serves approximately 17,300 customers in 34 communities, and it operates or maintains approximately 1,100 miles of distribution and transmission line and other facilities in 10 southwest and south central Kansas counties. As a nonprofit, Southern Pioneer is organized and operated for one purpose, and that is to provide electric power to its customers on a not-for-profit basis. Although Southern Pioneer does not have member owners, it operates much like a cooperative. There's no profit motive to pursue or shareholders to appease. It's also important to note that Southern Pioneer's rates are established through a formula rate-making plan, and that utilizes predetermined parameters to help reduce revenue requirements and manage rate impacts. Southern Pioneer also has a consumer advisory council with members representing all customer classes. The company presents and proposes rate changes and obtains input from this council before making its annual formula-based rate filing each year. So on November 30th, 2023, Southern Pioneer filed its application requesting approval to make certain revenue-neutral changes to its rate design. Southern Pioneer has had the same rate structure since 2007. So it was time to modernize the company's rate structure, streamline its administrative processes, and address industry changes, including cost shifting from self-generation. Southern Pioneer determined the current rate structure resulted in a disproportionate share of costs falling unfairly on the shoulders of many traditional customers who chose not to adopt distributed generation, DG, or customers who don't have the wherewithal to adopt these technologies. Pioneer's Board of Trustees, as well as boards of other nonprofit electric utilities across Kansas, feel it's their fiduciary duty to protect customers from these unfair cost shifts. A central component, or the central component of Southern Pioneer's proposal is its three-part rate design. And that includes a customer charge, which is a fixed charge that covers operating expenses, administrative, and infrastructure costs necessary to provide service to customers. There's also an energy charge, which is a volumetric charge based on the total amount of energy consumed by the customer. And then there's a demand charge, And this is a charge used to appropriately allocate costs to build, maintain, upgrade, increase in the customer charge for single-phase customers. The proposal is go from $14.67 to $16.67. Both of these charges are designed to be revenue neutral due to an offsetting reduction to the energy charge. And both charges are modest and in keeping with the principle of gradualism. Based on the written testimony, CURB's primary quarrel with the demand charge is its belief that the charge targets distributed generation, DG. Southern Pioneer respectfully disagrees. As a nonprofit utility, the company is agnostic to DG. And the rate design, the three-part rate design proposed in this docket, is agnostic to DG as well. To be clear, Southern Pioneer is not trying to inhibit renewables. The company has for over a decade voluntarily offered its customers the opportunity to participate in net metering, a program approved by the commission. And the company is currently seeking commission approval of a renewable energy program rider, which was developed by Southern Pioneer's power supplier, Sunflower Electric Power Corporation. If approved, the rider will give Southern Pioneer's customers a variety of options to support and facilitate renewables. CURB's opposition to the $2 increase in the customer charge is based on its view of how certain cost categories should be assigned between fixed and variable costs. Southern Pioneer stands by its methodology and believes the record will show that the proposed customer charge is well within the range of reasonableness. One final point, Southern Pioneer would like to emphasize that there's no fits all rate design. What works for one utility might not work for another. There are many variables, such as size, geographic location, governance structures, profit or nonprofit status, and customer preferences. We would submit that the rate design proposed in this docket is the best path forward for Southern Pioneer and its customers, and would respectfully request the Commission's approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wolford. Next, we have the Citizens Utility Ratepayer Board, Mr. Love.
Good morning, Commission. I'm Todd Love, appearing on behalf of CURB. Excuse me. Again, I'm Todd Love, appearing on behalf of CURB. CURB's here to address a couple of different issues. Number one, we figured the first thing we'd do is address the partial unanimous settlement agreement reached by the parties in this docket. As the Commission is aware, a unanimous settlement agreement must be viewed in three factors. These are: is the agreement supported by substantial evidence of the record as a whole? Will the agreement result in just and reasonable rates? Are the results in agreement in public interest? First question, is the agreement supported by substantial evidence as a whole? CURB believes the testimony shows that partial unanimous settlement agreement is supported by the evidence as a whole. Substantial competent evidence possesses something of substance and relevant consequence, which furnishes a substantial basis of fact to reasonably resolve the issue. CURB believes evidence submitted in this docket is sufficient to justify approval of the partial unanimous settlement agreement. Second element, will the agreement result in just and reasonable rates? CURB believes the testimony shows that the partial unanimous settlement agreement results in just and reasonable rates in there. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I apologize. I'll slow down. Again, CURB believes that the testimony shows that the partial unanimous settlement agreement results in just and reasonable rates, those which their agreement is concerned. Part 3 are the results of the agreement in the public interest. Evidence shows that the partial unanimous settlement agreement is in the public interest. Parties agree that terms of the unanimous settlement agreement are fair, reasonable, and fully supported by filed testimony, exhibits, and pleadings, and are fully and fairly negotiated by the signatories in good faith by all parties representing their unique interest, thereby meeting the requirement of partial unanimous settlement agreement is in the public interest. CURB asks the Commission to approve this portion of the agreement. Now I turn to the areas in which we are in disagreement. There are two main areas: increasing the customer charge and the creation and implementation of the demand charge. CURB believes the evidence would show that Southern Pioneer's request for an increase in the customer charge from $14.67 to $16.67 is not supported by the evidence. CURB is opposed to Southern Pioneer's request to raise the fixed customer charge by these $2. Testimony in CURB witness Glenn Watkins will show that the requested increase flies in the face of economic theory and does not promote conservation and therefore should be rejected. A fundamental goal of regulatory policy is that regulation should serve as a surrogate for competition to the greatest extent possible. And consumers in the competitive market tend to prefer volumetric pricing. From CURB's perspective, raising the fixed price goes against economic principles of efficient pricing. Furthermore, as an advocate for residential customers, CURB disagrees with Southern Pioneer in regards to how certain categories and costs are assigned between fixed costs and variable costs. By CURB's analysis, the fixed customer charge should actually be lower than it is now. However, in the interest of compromise, CURB is recommending to maintain current customer charge of $14.67. There's the second issue in which we have conflict with the parties is the demand charge. Southern Pioneer's request to implement the demand charge is not supported by evidence in this docket. Testimony will show that implementation of its demand charge will cause rates to increase for a large number of ratepayers. Southern Pioneer should have you believe that there's great urgency in implementing demand charge at this time. CURB disagrees. More specifically, as laid out in the direct testimony of Southern Pioneer witnesses and supported by KCC witness Dr. Glass, the main reason for demand charge seems to be Southern Pioneer's concern about distributed generation customers not paying their fair share of costs. CURB's evidence will show that there are currently only 35 residential customers with DG out of over 12,000 residential customers, and only 3 commercial customers out of over 4,000 commercial customers in Southern Pioneer's service territory. This is a de minimis number and to justify the creation of an entirely new rate schedule. Testimony will show that approval of the demand charge will cause an increase in the bills for anyone considering adopting DG and therefore inhibit the development of DG in Southern Pioneer service territory and run afoul of KSA 66-1256, which states legislature declared it is the public interest to promote renewable energy development in order to best utilize natural resources found in this state. It appears that not a single regulated utility has approved demand charges for residential customers. Two-part rates have worked well in this country for over 100 years, and CURB believes that they should not be changed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Love. Mr. Zakura, I have you down for 2 minutes.
Well, I had requested 1 minute, but the Commission's General Counsel was so kind to double my time, so thank you. We're participating in the case in support of the settlement agreement. For the reporter, Jim Zakor, on behalf of National Beef and Air Products. We did work with the company's accounting and regulatory group to confirm that the rates are neutral for us, and we confirmed that they are so. So we are in support of the settlement agreement. We take no position on the disputed issues that CURB has raised. And with that, I'll conclude. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Ms. Massentine for staff.
Good morning, Commissioners. Carly Massentine on behalf of Commission staff. Staff is fully supportive of a three-part rate design for what are currently classified as the residential and general service small classes on Southern Pioneer's system. As well, staff is fully supportive of the proposed increase to the customer charge. And here's why. As Southern Pioneer touched on, a utility has three broad categories of cost. There are customer costs, which are those associated with serving customers, such as customer-specific infrastructure and utility employees. There are energy costs, which are the variable costs associated with generating or procuring power for those customers. And then you have capacity costs, which are those associated with the adequate generation, transmission, and distribution of that power to the customer base. And the utility has to have enough infrastructure available at any given moment to serve its customer base, regardless of how much energy they are using or when they're using it. By proposing to implement a three-part rate, Southern Pioneer is attempting to recover distribution capacity costs caused by the fact that Southern Pioneer has to be able to deliver that maximum amount of energy demanded by customers, regardless of when they demand that energy. Now, under a traditional two-part rate structure, customers have paid customer charges and energy charges. The utilities have traditionally embedded costs associated with capacity into the energy charge. This rate structure served well for many years. And it used to be that within a class, generally, energy usage and the capacity that the utility needed to meet that usage were highly correlated. So embedding the capacity costs in the energy charge worked. But the landscape going forward just looks different than what it has before. Staff believes that a three-part rate for all classes may just be the solution needed to enter into the future that we are facing, where customers within single classes are less homogeneous in their usage patterns than ever before. The two-part rate no longer serves today's customer base because it allows for low usage, high demand customers to avoid their fair share of capacity costs, and thus has created an interclass subsidy where those who have more traditional consumption and usage patterns consequently are subsidizing those who are avoiding the energy charge for whatever reason. This leads to disparate treatment amongst individuals within a class. One of the reasons Southern Pioneer has for updating its rate structure is the adoption of distributed generation, or DG. DG customers generate a portion of the energy that they consume, thus consuming less energy from the utility, but they maintain the same level of demand. By avoiding the energy charges, they necessarily avoid paying the capacity charges that are embedded within the energy charge. DG customers tend to be those low usage, high demand customers, but the utility has to maintain a relatively high level of capacity compared to those customers' usage to support the customers during the times that they have to rely fully on the utility for power. And those customers do rely on the utility, otherwise they would be off-grid entirely. The technology just does not exist at this time to allow for a self-generating customer to store enough power long enough for it to be really meaningful, let alone to last through a Kansas winter without any reliance on a utility. With increasing customer interest in DG technology and increasing federal funding in the form of tax credits and grant programs, staff's assessment is that this customer activity will only continue to grow, which increases the magnitude of the disparate treatment within the classes. But, and this is something I really do want to underscore, it's not just DG customers that are trying to be addressed in this rate structure. There are only 38 customers on Southern Pioneer's system today, which make up less than 1% of its customer base. That is a small subset of customers. Now, staff is always in favor of proactively addressing changing trends in customer behavior because generally trying to fix a problem later rather than sooner is more complex and more expensive. But the fact is, DG customers are not the only groups that this rate design seeks to right set. Space heating customers are another subset where the two-part rate does not work optimally. These customers are high demand, but their demand is at a different time than other customers. They don't use as much energy in the summer when their space heater isn't running, compared to their overall usage throughout the year. But summer is when the electric utility typically experiences its system-wide peak. Due to the use of the space heater in the winter, these customers, though, as a whole, require the utility to maintain enough distribution capacity throughout the year to be able to serve for when the heaters come on in the winter months. Also, in the winter, this subset can create a peak demand in the morning rather than in the afternoon being the traditional time for an electric utility's peak demand. This just further speaks to why Southern Pioneer's demand charge is appropriately designed. Southern Pioneer has chosen to use non-coincident peak, which captures each individual customer's peak demand, accounting for the varying usage and behavior patterns across customers within a single class. Southern Pioneer has also stated that many of its customers have second homes or hunting lodges within its territory. These homes may only be in use 1 week out of the year, but Southern Pioneer has to keep up the distribution capacity to serve that home at any given time. Those customers avoid paying their full share of capacity charges because they pay little to no energy charges when they are not using the property for the majority of the year. In addition, a demand charge would send an optimal price signal to electric vehicle customers, who often charge their vehicle at home at night. The demand charge allows Southern Pioneer to lower the energy charge, so these customers are able to charge more affordably overall. Also, because EV home charging places a significant demand on the system, these customers will be incentivized to charge at night. This will be in order to avoid setting their peak demand during the day when they're using electricity for other end uses as well. So to better account for diversity amongst individual customers and to ensure that cost causers are paying for their demand put on the system, staff believes that rates should be designed so that the rates charged corresponds to the cost structure of electric utilities. We believe there should be a customer charge for customer-related costs, an energy charge for energy-related costs, and a demand charge for capacity-related costs. Staff believes the three-part rate to be the optimal rate design, and staff isn't shying away from the fact that this is new frontier. We acknowledge this is the first time a regulated entity in Kansas would have a mandatory three-part rate for its residential customers. We don't support that lightly. But here is why we think Southern Pioneer is actually the perfect regulated entity in Kansas to forge this new territory. Southern Pioneer isn't an investor-owned utility. They are a not-for-profit utility that is wholly owned by a cooperative. This means they have no traditional profit motive. Southern Pioneer simply seeks to recover its actual cost plus the margin required by its lenders in the most economically efficient and fair method possible, which staff agrees is a three-part rate. Southern Pioneer presents a salient test case for the introduction of a demand charge for 3 additional reasons. First, Southern Pioneer is a relatively small utility, but it's large enough that the introduction of a demand charge will affect a diverse subset of customers. Second, the owner of Southern Pioneer, Pioneer Electric, already has introduced a demand charge for its residential classes with a minimal amount of customer objection. This experience is critical because Southern Pioneer and Pioneer share the same management. So Southern Pioneer has a well-tested customer education program and marketing materials at ready, and their management is adept at anticipating the questions and challenges that will arise when a three-part rate is rolled out for the first time. Third, the proposed demand charge is small relative to the actual cost of capacity as measured by staff in staff's class cost of service. This supports the concept of gradualism that is important to staff and to the commission. The relative size of this demand charge will help customers adapt to the change, minimizing any potential disruption or huge spike in monthly bills. Now, as far as the customer charge, Southern Pioneer has not raised its customer charge since 2021. Further, a $2 increase in staff's opinion is not unreasonable given the inflationary environment we are in, where substantial evidence exists to support the fact that fixed costs to serve customers have increased. In order to better align cost causers with cost payers and to properly recover Southern Pioneer's expenses for maintaining the grid, staff supports both the three-part rate and the increased customer charge. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mazantine. Looks like we're ready for the examination of witnesses, and we will begin with Southern Pioneer. You may call your first witness.
Mr. Chair. Southern Pioneer calls Chantry Scott.
Good morning.
Morning, Mr. Scott. Please state your name and title.
Before we begin, I'll have the court reporter swear him in.
Sir, will you raise your right hand for me, please? Do you solemnly swear to affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Please state your name and title for the record.
I'm Chantry Scott. I'm the Assistant CEO and CFO for Pioneer Electric and Southern Pioneer Electric Company.
Are you the same Chantry Scott who filed direct and rebuttal testimony in this docket?
Yes, I am.
I'm sorry.
Yes, I am.
Do you wish to make any changes to that testimony?
No, sir.
So if I were to examine you today live, would your testimony be substantially the same as it was when you submitted your written testimony?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, I move to admit Mr. Scott's written direct and rebuttal testimony in the record.
Are there any objections? Hearing none, they will be admitted.
I'll pass the witness.
All right. Looks like we have the Citizens Utility Ratepayer Board for cross-examination. Mr. Love.
Again, Todd Love appearing on behalf of CURB. Mr. Scott, I just have a few questions for you, if you don't mind. According to your direct testimony on page 9, line 19 of your direct testimony, you have a chance to find it.
Yes.
You state you pose the question of why is it necessary to implement the three-part demand rate at this time? Your answer is similar to the rate structure in place in the high-volume industrial and large commercial customer classes. The rate structure for other classes needs to address the problem of shifting cost recovery for self-generating customers to customers who do not self-generate. Is that a correct statement? Correct reading of your?
Yes, that's in my testimony.
Okay. Per your testimony, Southern Pioneer currently has only 35 residential DG customers and 3 commercial customers. Is that correct?
Yes, at the time of the writing, yes, that was the number.
Has that changed since?
I think it has. I don't have the updated numbers. Today.
Currently, you have over 12,000 residential customers. Is that correct?
Yes.
The 35 is less than 1/2 of 1%.
Yeah, if you do the math.
And you have over 4,000 commercial customers, so 3 is less than 1/10 of 1% that have DG. Further, you indicate that one of the reasons, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, apologize. Further, you indicate that one of your main reasons for requesting demand charges to align Southern Pioneer with Pioneer's rate structure, correct?
Correct. That was one of the primary initiatives in the docket.
Southern Pioneer is a regulated company, regulated by the commission. Is that correct?
Yes.
Southern Pioneer, or Pioneer is not.
Correct. We're self-regulated by the Board of Trustees.
So you have 2 completely separate business models. Is that correct?
Yes and no. I think they're similar in the operating and the what we do from a day-to-day basis and how we approach the overall practices that we go through daily. Corporate structure-wise, they are different, but they operate in much the same way on a day-to-day basis.
Are you aware of any utilities regulated by state regulatory commission that have mandatory residential demand charge in Kansas?
I am not.
Are you aware of any in the surrounding states?
I am not, no.
Are you aware of any nationally?
No, but.
I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Love. We will now move to commission questions, and I'll give my colleague Commissioner Keene the first opportunity here.
Thank you, Chair Friend. Good morning.
Good morning.
let me kind of cut to the chase in my way. Let's look at this thing holistically. Taking the, let's take the demand charge first. Summarize for me the essence of what you think the policy considerations are behind having this demand charge and having this three-part rate design.
I think some of the policy things that we would consider, and you know, our board of directors and the Consumer Advisory Council and management staff, we all considered certain aspects of it. Primarily, we're proposing the change to the rate structure and the addition of the three-part rate and demand charge to ensure that there isn't that interclass cross subsidization between members. We are seeing more and more changes in the usage in that group of customers. You know, historically, that group has been pretty homogeneous. They have the same usage characteristics. And with new technologies such as DG, that's one item that causes it, but there are other things like EVs, you know, smart appliances, just changes in customer habits and patterns. Those are changing the way that customers use energy. And so therefore it kind of creates that potential for cross subsidy in the current rate design with the two-part rate.
All right. So why is it, in your opinion, that the proposed $3 increase per month is reasonable?
Well, I think the $3 is a step in the right direction. It, you know, based on the cost of service results, it doesn't cover even the entire distribution component of the rate or the cost related to capacity, but it is a gradual step in the right direction. It's introducing the rate or that additional charge to the customers at a small enough level that it's not a huge impact rate-wise to any particular customer. And so, but it does start providing that mechanism and that kind of educational process. It allows for that education of consumers to know that there's a difference between capacity and energy in the rate structure. And so it clearly communicates that to the customers.
Okay. Even though it's been suggested that this would be unique, certainly to residential rates, what is there about, let me start the question slightly differently. In the opening statement, Ms. Massington, on behalf of the KCC staff, indicated that it was the KCC staff's view that costs, in terms of cost allocation, that the cost causation there should be some relationship between cost causation and those who bear the cost. Your thoughts about that?
Correct. I think that's one of the primary principles in rate design. I think that there should be a correlation between cost causation and you know, the coverage of those costs. I think the proposed rate design does a better job of doing that than the current two-part rate. You know, the rate structure, the three-part rate design is not new. You know, we've utilized this rate structure for many, many years on industrial and larger commercial customers because of that very reason.
All right. Let's kind of go through the same drill. I appreciate your indulgence of these questions. Let's kind of go through the same drill with respect to the customer charge, which I understand to be basically recovery of fixed costs. Am I correct on that?
Correct. You know, the costs are a little bit different. They're more specific to the individual customer taking service, like the meter cost, the cost of customer service reps, dealing with customers on a daily basis. So the costs are slightly different, but yes, they're more fixed in nature.
Okay, so in your view, why is it that you believe the increased $2 per month charge as proposed is reasonable and necessary?
Well, it's been stated, we haven't raised the customer charge since the last case. And so in that period of time, rates of, or expenses, costs have gone up for inflationary reasons. And that's, you see that in the results of the cost of service study when you compare the last cost of service study that we had that was utilized to provide support for the last increase to the customer charge and the current cost of service that's utilized. You see an increase in those components that are typically embedded into the customer charge.
Okay, if I understood correctly, and I'm kind of leaning on Mr. Wolford's opening just a bit, it's not that since 2007 that this changes in rate design have been proposed, is that correct?
Correct. We've changed the individual levels of the pricing of that, but we haven't changed the overall structure since '07. And many of these rates or all of the rate designs carried over from what was formerly the Aquila assets. And so Aquila had these rate structures in place, and we've utilized that same structure, for the last, or since 2007. So
No further questions. Thank you for your indulgence of my question.
thank you.
Commissioner Keither, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. A lot of the questions that Commissioner Keene went down that road were the same road I was thinking about. But between the testimony from staff, and just to see that we're all on the same page here, that the gradual level of increases to lessen the amount that it might be if you didn't do this now.
Correct. If we went full to the entire amount that's shown as capacity costs in the cost of service study, the impact on customers may be at a level that would be greater than we would like to see for our customers, and we'd rather take gradual steps to have less impact on those customers.
Which does lead the question, when, how many gradual steps are you going to need?
I think that's yet to be determined when we.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mhm.
Morning, Mr. Scott.
Good morning.
I'm also interested in the demand charge and sort of the policy signal that maybe we're sending here. So just a few questions to try to help me understand the conversations that you all had in developing this. First, what were your conversations and what consideration did you all give to the bill impact for customers with distributed generation systems or people adopting electric vehicles? What were the conversations like around that?
I think with DG, we really wanted to make sure we're sending the right price signals to those, and when we have the right rate structure in place for those making decisions. We have vendors that are very active, selling those systems in our territory. We have customers that are definitely interested in looking at that and looking at the economics of that. So we want to make sure that we have a rate structure in place that they can see what their utility bills are going to be after they make those investments if they choose to do so. And so trying to get ahead of, we do have very few at this current moment, but as others had mentioned, with the tax subsidies, the government funding, the more economic cost of solar and wind, those are all playing into additional incentives why customers may make that choice. And we want to be really agnostic from a rate standpoint, whether they make that choice or not. If they choose to make that choice, we want to be in a position where we help facilitate that, help educate them, and help them do whatever best suits their needs and desires. But we want to make sure that we have a rate structure in place to make sure others that don't make that decision or can't afford to make that decision don't end up carrying some of the costs that are left when those customers use less energy overall. So those were the primary thoughts that were behind the DG related conversations.
And just so I understand the demand charge correctly, my read is that it is not time differentiated in any way. It is a demand charge set on the highest demand during any 15-minute period within the month. It's an it's a non-coincident peak demand charge, correct? It's not, doesn't try to coincide with your peak at all.
That's correct. That is consistent with the other rate structures that we have in place that have a demand component.
That have a what?
That have a demand component.
Do you offer a separate time of use rate that a distributed generation customer or an electric vehicle owning customer could select as an alternative to manage their capacity drain on the system as opposed to being forced onto the demand charge?
We do not at this time.
Are you still a summer peaking system?
Yes, sir.
How much analysis did you do of the value that distributed generation might provide to manage that peak?
We haven't done any exhaustive studies of that.
Would you agree with me that there is a fundamental difference between large commercial and industrial customers and residential customers in their ability to create a high load factor and maintain stable and even usage? Maybe
Yeah,
let me phrase it another
Yeah,
way.
if you-
Are
if you could
residential
restate
users
that.
intrinsically typically low load factor customers in that they have certain times of day where they use energy and probably have less ability to make their usage stable?
I think that's a fair statement overall. I think there are opportunities there for educating customers to be able to understand their, yet it may be small, their impact on the overall peak or capacity needs of the system. And I think the three-part rate allows for that education process better than the two-part rate does.
Okay.
I might also state that, there are, I feel there may be opportunities for some customers that may be high peak, high energy customers. It may give them the opportunity to lower their overall bill. When you look at a kilowatt hour usage, there are some customers that can't afford the things that would help them lower their overall kilowatt hour usage. They can't afford the DG system on their roof. They can't afford better insulation or high efficiency windows, or they may be living in a trailer house that is very inefficient. And so today's rate structure kind of penalizes them because they would typically potentially be a high use customer that so they're paying maybe more than their fair share, where if you had the three-part rate in effect, it may be an opportunity for them to be able to lower their peak demand and have an opportunity maybe to overall lower their bill.
I'm going to make a statement and you're going to be able to tell some of the initial thoughts I've had about this policy issue and on my initial read of your pre-filed testimony. And as I was listening to the opening statements, I jotted down that it strikes me that the three-part rate structure, it seems like kind of a hammer to get at a potential cost shift issue, and very much sort of a penalty or a disincentive for using large electrical appliances or having any spike, rather than an approach of trying to manage when those occur, to maybe take advantage of them for revenue purposes or for moving them away from peaks. If you could just respond to that comparison of my hypothetical of, is it a penalty versus a way of managing?
Well, it's definitely not our, our motivation's definitely not to come from a penalty type scenario. I think we view it as more of an opportunity to help educate the customers and give them the ability to then try to manage that peak, given their individual scenarios. I don't know if there's different mechanisms where, you can dangle a carrot, but I think it comes back to kind of the same desire in the end, is to help customers understand their impact on the overall grid and at the end of the day, pay their fair share for the capacity needs that they require, depending on their usage and the decisions that they make on a day-to-day basis.
Okay.
I don't know if that answered your question at all, but
I think it does, and I think it was an unfairly unanswerable question. I really just wanted you to pontificate on it, so I appreciate the answer. Maybe just one final question on the increased customer charge. I'm leaning on sort of my own recollections of some recent proceedings here at the KCC and our reporting to the legislature of the customer charges of the other companies we regulate in the state of Kansas. And I believe they are uniformly at about $14.25 right now after Evergy's last rate case. I might ask Mr. Glass about that later. And I noticed you were moving from a number that's higher than that already to a couple dollars more. Was there any consideration when you and the board spoke about the changes to rates? Was there any benchmarking to customer charges of other utilities in the state, whether they were investor-owned, which are the ones I have visibility into, versus co-ops that might be near you? Just if you could describe whether there was any benchmarking and what consideration you gave that.
sure, we have looked at that. We understand that we're, higher than some of the investor-owned utilities. When we compare to co-ops across the state, Pioneer is fairly similar to where Southern Pioneer is hoping to go. Other electric co-ops across the state, we see as high as $30, $40 on the customer charge. And I think it really goes to show the difference between Southern Pioneer and the investor-owned utilities that typically become before this body. We are much more similar to an electric cooperative, the way that we manage. We're nonprofit. We don't have the incentives, the profit incentives for shareholders. We're locally managed. We care about the customers and the customers that we deal with daily are our neighbors, our family members, our friends, our employees. So we definitely are sympathetic to our rates. whenever we look at anything from an operational standpoint, we kind of go back to our paradigm as being best possible service at the lowest possible price while managing risk on behalf of our customers. And I think that when we do that, when we look at the rate structure, again, we try to fall back on, are we making sure that we're not exposing any of our customers to potential rate shifts or cross subsidization. And that's why we kind of tend to then lean back on what the cost of service is providing and trying to align rates the best we can with that. Understanding that we may always be higher in some categories than the investor owns that typically become before you.
Sure. But very helpful answer. Appreciate it. With that, I have no more questions. Either of my colleagues developed additional questions? Commissioner Keaton?
Yes, thank you. Just to follow on to that last line of questioning from Chair French. If I understand from one of the facts that Mr. Wolford brought out in his opening, you have approximately 17,000 customers, is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
And that's in how many counties?
Oh, put me on the spot.
No, I'm sorry about that.
I don't, it's rough.
Hand signals are
Roughly 10 counties, 11 counties.
within your service area. Would I be correct in saying that, what are the largest urban areas in your service territory?
We do serve the city of Liberal. That would be the largest, if you want to call it urban area. Most of the rest is small, either rural areas or small towns.
Given the nature of that customer base, especially the fact that you have a predominant number of customers, I presume, that are in the rural setting. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
What is the population of Liberal, do you know, ballpark?
I don't.
I'm just trying to.
We do have, a large segment of our customer base is in the city of Liberal. Overall,
right.
they would be probably the predominant area.
I think the thing I'm really driving at, sir, is given the rural nature of your customer base, including the factors that bear on providing service to the city of Liberal and Seward County generally, to what extent does having that sort of customer base create complications or difficulties in trying to assign cost of service?
Well, I think it's somewhat different than what you would see on a typical investor-owned utility, just because our customer density is much different. But I think when you get back to the individual methodology or components of a cost of service study, it's much the same, I would say. It just, the results end up being a little bit different because they're skewed by that lower density. So it's harder to recover those fixed costs just because you have less customers to collect those costs over. So,
Sure. Which is a problem that's analogous with a lot of other cooperatives throughout the state, is it not?
correct. Yes.
I'm very familiar, you alluded to the fact that there are some co-ops that have customer charges that may be as high as $34. I'm familiar with that. I'm a recipient of that. What is it then that, I'm not trying to be unfair in this question in the slightest, I'm really trying to kind of lean on your experience and your knowledge to tell me, why is it that in a rural setting such as the one that you have, I think I know some of the answers to it, but I'd rather have you tell me, why is it that your fixed cost is maybe a half to a third of what some of those other electric cooperatives would charge as a fixed cost?
I think it's dependent on the territory that we serve. We purchased this territory from the sale of the Aquila assets. Aquila did tend to operate along some of the major highways. So when you look at the service territory of Southern Pioneer, it encompasses the city of Liberal, some communities along some of the major highways. And then it does have some rural components for sure in it that are similar to other electric cooperatives. If you compare it just for comparison's sake to Pioneer Electric, the owner of Southern, we serve the very southwest corner. We don't have any really larger urban settings like the city of Liberal, but we do have a lot more miles of line in terms of serving the rural areas. So, there are co-ops, I guess is what I'm trying to say, that are more rural than what Southern Pioneer is, but as a whole, the comparison's a lot closer comparing Southern with one of the electric cooperatives than it is when you look at an investor-owned utility serving City of Wichita or Topeka or so forth. The density is just dramatically different.
I appreciate those distinctions that you allude to. Is it possible that two other reasons it might be better managerial efficiency?
Well, we'd hope so.
Because
I think some of that is the structure that we have with Pioneer and Southern Pioneer. We have a lot of shared resources between the two companies, shared management, shared billing department, shared energy services department, so we have a lot of shared cost between the two that definitely helps.
Is it possible that one other factor could be economies of scale?
Sure.
And how would that play into the result?
Again, for kind of the same reasons, we're sharing some of those costs over a greater number of customers between the two organizations. So again, just having similar cost structure spread over more customers.
Very good. Thank you again for your responses. No further questions.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Keen. Commissioner Keither, have you developed any more questions, or you're good? All right. With that, we will turn to redirect Southern Pioneer.
Trevor Wolford. I was asked to identify myself.
Thank you.
Sure. Mr. Scott, do you recall Ms. Massenthin's opening where she said it's staff's, I think something to the effect that it's staff's general approach to be proactive and with issues, not reactive? Do you recall that
Yes, sir.
testimony? Yeah. What are your thoughts on that approach?
Well, I agree with that. Like I said earlier, currently, if you just look at the DG issue, currently we have a relatively low number, but we see the writing on the wall of a potential of having a lot more of that, or the continued growth of that over time. And we really would like to get that rate structure in place today to help educate those customers and help them make more informed decisions as they look at that as an option. So yeah, I agree with that comment.
You touched on, in your written testimony, your experience with Pioneer's three-part rate implemented over a year ago.
Yes.
Didn't spend much ink on it. Given the commissioner's questions, can you elaborate a little bit on that experience?
Sure. We went into that with a lot of thought. Some of the things that I mentioned earlier, our board of directors and management staff really kind of really talked through that in several strategic discussions. We had, PSE come in and do some studies for us on looking at what that potential might be and giving some options going forward. And then it really, once we made the decision that was the right path forward for us, we started really thinking through how do we develop an educational process to make this as smooth for the customers as we could. Tried to get well in advance of the actual adoption of that, start educating them on what demand is versus energy and how would you potentially control demand, those types of things. I have examples in my written testimony of some of the communication that we sent out to customers, but really thinking through how do we make that as smooth of a transition as we could. Once we finally implemented the rate, we were expecting, honestly, probably a lot more comments and a lot more questions than when we've received. Really, customers have been understanding. We've had a handful of questions, and most of the questions have been more clarification and just further educational, trying to get a better understanding of those concepts. But we haven't found it that customers find it difficult to understand the difference between demand and energy, and overall adoption has been really a non-event.
Are the customer demographics similar, Pioneer and Southern Pioneer? I guess what I'm getting at is this a pretty good template?
I believe so. When you look at our residential and small commercial customers, we have many of the same types of customers. When you look at the counties involved, we have, various economic statuses, amongst all those counties, that if that was a factor, really it comes down to, as I mentioned in my testimony, the load factor of the individual customers. And we see that on the Pioneer side, that there's a diverse load factor amongst the single phase group, just like we see with the group that we're proposing to implement that on the southern side. So yeah, I would say the template is fairly consistent.
Do the Pioneer board members also pay these rates?
Yes, they do.
Chair French raised an issue about time variant rates. It was a good question, good inquiry. And you don't have time of use offering right now, do you?
No, we do not.
Is this something that's out of the question?
No, I think that's something that we could definitely look at in the future. It's just not an option that we've really ever looked at or entertained. I guess to some extent we've looked at time of use connected more closely to the generation and transmission and connected to the cost of the power supply. But personally, that's kind of how I've thought of time of use. So I don't know that we've really contemplated it much. But definitely, I think those things are on the table to look at in the future if we need to.
And that's something you'll likely explore now?
Potentially, given the changes that we see and really, if we feel the current rate design isn't adequate to respond to some of those or send the right signals, then I think we would look at other options. But I think it would just really be dependent on a lot of variables going into the future.
You also talked about gradualism and incremental steps. Is Southern Pioneer nimble enough to make adjustments if things aren't working during that gradual process with the rate design?
Guess I'm trying to understand your question. Is it from a revenue requirement or just internally from administrative? I guess
Just customer acceptance. Pioneer's experience went quite well.
Sure.
And you say that similar demographics, similar customer base. If Southern Pioneer's experience doesn't go quite that well,
okay.
I know you expect it to go well, but
Sure.
what would the process be to make adjustments? I know with a larger investor-owned utility, it's hard to turn that aircraft carrier around.
Sure. Well, I think definitely we are nimble enough, and we know our customers, we're around our customers, we're involved in our communities, and I think, even later this month, Lindsay and I will be in front of, the chamber and the businesses in Liberal talking about some of these changes. So I think key to that is really trying to communicate the best we can, try to have those conversations back and forth, understanding what our customers' needs are and desires are, concerns are, and then either, trying to develop and identify is that just an educational process or something that we haven't communicated well that we need to do a better job of, or is it structurally we need to try to make a change because this just isn't working for our customers. I think we really just through the process of all that communication, we'd have to determine what the right steps are. But yeah, I definitely think we're nimble enough to adjust however we need to, or at least come before the commission to adjust that as needed if we need to in the future.
And you're committed to the same level of education as you have.
Definitely, I think that's key to making this a success.
I have no further questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wolford. If there are no more commissioner questions prompted by that, I think we will conclude Mr. Scott's testimony. We do thank you for your time, and you may step down.
Thank you, commissioners.
Southern Pioneer, you may call your second witness.
Southern Pioneer calls Richard Mackey.
Good morning, Mr. Mackey. I'll have the court reporter swear you in.
Do you solemnly swear or do you just give the truth, the whole truth?
Please state your name and title for the record.
Richard J. Mackey, Vice President of Economics, Rates, Business Planning, and Policy Engineering.
Mr. Mackey, is your microphone on? Press the gray button. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If you'll please repeat the.
Yes, Richard J. Mackey with Power System Engineering, and I'm Vice President of Economics, Rates, and Business Planning.
Are you the same Richard J. Mackey who filed direct and rebuttal testimony, written direct and rebuttal testimony in the docket?
Yes, I am.
Do you wish to make any changes to that testimony?
No, I don't.
If you were to be examined live today, would your testimony be substantially the same as it was when you submitted your written testimony?
Yes, it would.
Mr. Chair, I move to admit Mr. Mackey's written direct and rebuttal testimonies in the record.
Any objection? Hearing none, Mr. Mackey's testimonies will be admitted into the record.
Now I pass the witness.
All right, thank you. Curb, cross-examination.
Again, Todd Love, appearing on behalf of Curb. Mr. Mackey, I have just a couple of questions for you. By your own acknowledgement, class cost of service is not an exact science, is that correct?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Matter of fact, on page 22, line 13 of your direct testimony, you state that it is vital to recognize some of the inherent limitations of class cost of service study. First, it must be emphasized that class cost of service analysis, while basically an engineering and economic evaluation, is an art, not an exact science. There are many different methodologies, techniques, and assumptions that have been and will continue to be advocated by rate analysts. Because the various philosophies and assumptions can significantly affect the results of this analysis, results should be treated providing an indication of a general range of class cost responsibility, not precise values. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Question regarding the demand charge. As to the demand charge, you state that other utilities have implemented demand charge for residential and small commercial customers. You show in table 9 on page 35 of your testimony that 8 co-ops that have been implemented demand charges and no non-co-ops. Is that correct?
That is correct. All of those utilities are electric cooperatives in Kansas.
Are you aware of any utility regulated by state regulatory commissions that are in this country that have approved mandatory residential demand charges?
Could you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
Are you aware of any utilities regulated by state regulatory commissions in this country that have approved a mandatory residential demand charge?
I am aware that a lot have been exploring that, but to my knowledge, none have yet approved that type of a rate.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Love. We will turn to commissioner questions, and again, I will allow Commissioner Keen to go first, if you have any questions.
Well, good morning.
Good morning, Commissioner Keen.
Let me follow on the line of questioning just directed to you by Mr. Love. And I think implicit within his question, if I'm making the correct inference, is he's concerned about having some of these mandatory charges for DG customers. What's the downside to that? From the perspective of the company or customers?
I'm sorry, the downside of?
Of having a mandatory component to the DG charges.
That's a good question. I believe anytime you make a change, it can be difficult, right? There was a time at which there was no such thing as time of use rates for residential as well. Well, now we do have utilities that have mandatory time of use. So progress requires some change. And so there is some effort that's required by the utility to take customers through that change and to position themselves better for the future. So I think that's, I don't know if I'd call it a downside, but it's just an implication of modernizing the rate design is it's going to take some effort.
A transitional issue, if you would.
Absolutely. I think of a quote by Bondbright, if you're familiar with James Bondbright, that said, we need to be careful to guard against the tyranny of the status quo.
Okay. I'm going to ask you what is, I will acknowledge it at the outset, is a leading question. Is the fact that you would have a mandatory component in the DG charge not somewhat mitigated by the fact that as a nonprofit entity, the utility in this instance is trying to basically allocate costs to those who cause those costs to be incurred?
That's absolutely the case. There is no overall revenue or profit motive. It is all about cost causation, which is really, I view it as a couple principles there. Cost causation is about allocating costs to those that have caused them and also to those that are benefiting from those costs. And clearly there's consumer-driven costs, right? To send bills, to have meters in place. There's energy-related costs related to needing to generate electricity. And then there's distribution or there's capacity-related costs that are related to sizing facilities and having facilities in place to provide reliable energy to customers. So those three types of costs, those classifications are all types of costs. And so it makes sense to have rates that go along with it and charge customers on that same basis.
Given your background, as it appears in the record, your experience, in your judgment, is the proposed $3 per month charge reasonable? Is it excessive? And why do you believe it is reasonable if that's the case, or excessive if you believe that's the case?
Yeah, good question. I do believe it's reasonable. It's within the range of what other utilities have been doing. in that table that I referenced, other utilities in Kansas that have done this same type of a rate. It's somewhat in the middle of that range, I would say.
Okay.
It's well below the actual cost. And so again, cost of service is not a precise values where it's not like a recipe where you get the answer and that's what you implement as rates. Cost of service is one of the components. And in this case, the cost of service is showing that the demand charge could be at least twice what we're proposing. And so there is some gradualism, some moderation applied. We're sensitive to bill impacts of this change. We did look at, what if we had a higher demand charge and we start to see the distribution of the impact spread out to what was more concerning. So those things fed into how we settled on $3. It's also, where Pioneer started, and the Pioneer Electric Cooperative started at $3. And it worked well in that case. So it demonstrated that that's not too high to start. So those things all went into that decision. That's why it was a reasonable place to start.
Thank you very much for the granularity of that response. I appreciate it. I think it was very holistic and I'm grateful for that. I have no further questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Keen. Commissioner Keith, are any questions?
Not at this time, thank you.
Morning, Mr. Mackey. I have a couple questions. I'll try to hit on a little different themes than I did with Mr. Scott, but I am also interested in the demand charge primarily. At page 7 of your rebuttal testimony, I don't know if you need to turn there, but you have a statement. If I can find it. It's sort of at the bottom of page 7, last line of an answer there. I guess it's line 20. It says, in the rare occasions that a demand charge is based upon a system peak, they are typically reserved for developing generation-related peak period prices such as interruptible or curtailable programs. I think I understand what you're saying there, because those programs are highly correlated with generation cost and avoiding generation cost. Would you agree that the peaks related to distributed generation customers or EV charging also have some component of either additional generating cost or avoided generating cost, depending on when they occur?
Yeah, I would say for those technologies, there could be avoided or additional generation or transmission related cost. And so I guess I would draw the distinction is that could be a good use of time of use pricing, for example. And what's being proposed here doesn't curtail that possibility in the future. What it does is it looks at the distribution side of the facilities that have to be there all the time, right? To serve whether that customer is requiring capacity in the fall for grain drying or in the summer for air conditioning or in the winter for heat. The capacity is there year round. And that's what this charge is focused on. It doesn't mean that there couldn't be a different part of the rate that would be a better price signal as it relates to generation and transmission capacity or energy costs for that matter.
And that goes to my second question, which is, I understand you say that it's only in those rare occasions where you might look at a coincident peak, but don't demand peaks also impact the size of transmission and distribution build out? So, the size of the pipes or the wires, if you will, it would need to be bigger if your system peak is all occurring at one time and you're not able to spread it out over time. In general, your peaks do impact the amount of system build out you have to have, right?
Yes, they do. And for Southern Pioneer, it's maybe because just the structure of them being a distribution utility, they're not vertically integrated. Yeah. So there's probably 5 peaks that matter. Mm-hmm. There's Sunflower's generation peak that establishes their power bill. Mm-hmm. There's the transmission peak that also establishes part of that bill. There's a system non-coincident peak, right, that is also part of the power bill. And then for the local distribution system, yes, there is peaks related to peaks on feeders, substations, even individual customer transformers that all matter in how systems are sized.
So maybe ask you a little more general question. I think it was during redirect, Mr. Scott mentioned that you came in during this whole process and gave a variety of rate design options to sort of address this issue of capacity versus energy costs and being able to properly collect capacity costs. If you recall, can you kind of lay out what sort of options you gave their board? And did you offer anything other than non-coincident peak demand charge?
I believe we looked at others. It was probably a few years ago now,
Yeah.
but typically in these situations, we would look at a few different types of demand charges. We would also look at time of use energy. And so we've got clients around the country that have done both for different purposes. So you just have to align the rate design choice with what your purpose is.
Do you recall if there were any conversations about trying to push incremental demand that you see coming into sort of off-peak times?
Yeah, there was conversations about that. One of the challenges is that the power supplier, they're so related to generation and transmission, there's not really time of use pricing at that level. So there are demand charges, but you have to be able to anticipate that.
Yeah.
I think it's unfair to charge customers for what they're contributing to a system peak if they don't even know about it. They have no control over when that peak's going to happen. So to retroactively bill them for it is, I think, a challenge. So you have to be able to anticipate it ahead of time, and that's not the situation today.
Or give a window of when you would prefer
window.
they use.
Certainly,
Yeah.
certainly. So for time of use rates, we can look at when do these peaks tend to happen. It's not perfect,
Yeah.
and then you can price a time of use rate to recoup those. And on the distribution system, you can, through the proposed rate design, it does provide an incentive, not maybe to shift load. Shifting load might be like a generation benefit, but to stagger loads.
Mhm.
To reduce cost, or perhaps defer upgrade requirements
Yeah.
in the distribution system by staggering loads rather than stacking loads.
So that's all great context. I'm not going to try to use your words against you here, but you said we want to avoid, the tyranny of the status quo. And I guess what I'm a little concerned about is it feels like we're creating a rate structure here rather than trying to manage the new uses that are coming on the system and make them beneficial for the utility. It feels like we're trying to fit them in our revenue box and collect costs in the same way rather than manage them. What response would you have to that? Is this a good transitional mechanism? Is it just intended to slow down those new uses until we can come up with a better managed process? What's your response?
It's a great question. I see there's multiple rate design approaches and mechanism that could come together to really maybe solve multiple purposes, right? There's not just like one rate design change that's going to fix everything, right? So this is focusing on how do we more fairly and stably collect the grid costs that everyone is benefiting from. At the same time, it is still trying to manage load, right? As someone that does buy an EV has an incentive not to charge at the same time as they're running their air conditioner and they have all their lights on and they're cooking or shower, doing laundry. There is an incentive to manage your load, and they have direct control over that, right? They know, how they could do that by staggering their loads. So there is some of that being accomplished
Yeah.
Like for EVs, for how you're using power within your home. It doesn't, I would agree, it doesn't get to this issue of how do we increase efficiency at the generator, right?
Yeah.
And take advantage of, hourly market prices, right? It doesn't get to that part. And that's where, a time differentiated, like energy charge, for example, would be a good tool for that. I think that to me is probably the ideal rate, is to have the grid cost collected in a fair and stable way, and then another part of the rate that's providing the price signal related to a generation costs.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was very interesting, the answer about, you are still providing a signal to not run all your big appliances at once.
Correct.
But at the risk of like trying to provide engineering testimony, I mean, my understanding is, something like an EV is going to be like an 11 or 10 or 11 kW demand. Your biggest other appliance is going to be something like 1. So something like an EV is always going to set your demand charge, most likely. And so I guess you have an incentive not to charge it during the other things, so your demand charge isn't even higher, but you don't have any incentive to run it or to charge it at any particular time of the day, right?
Well, I think when you look at EV charging, yeah, if it's like a 7 kW level 2 charger, it doesn't mean it always operates at 7 kW. There's a minimum charge rate of like 1.4, 1.5 kW. And so if it doesn't need to charge very much because you only drove it 50 miles that day, it has overnight 8 to 10 hours to get that much power. And it might not charge at 7 or 11 kW. It might charge at 1.5 to 2 kW. In that case, it probably wouldn't set the peak for that homeowner. So I think there's a lot of things that factor into it. And we're certainly wanting to direct charging to not happen at the same time that the load of the rest of the house is increasing, because that can just cause equipment failures and cost increases for everyone.
I think you can tell I have a lot of the same concerns you do. I just might be coming at it a little different direction, but I think we have a lot of the same goals there on how these things can be managed. So I think that is my final question. Let me pause to see if the other commissioners have developed any other questions before we turn to redirect. All right, we will now turn to redirect. Mr. Wolford.
Trevor Wolford. We're talking about time of use, and there's been quite a few questions on that. Does a time of use rate really fix the inequities in assignment of fixed distribution costs for cost causation purposes?
In my experience, it's possible that it helps, but it's not a direct kind of solution to that problem.
Is there a way to couple a demand charge with a time of use charge?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a client in Colorado that has residential members. They have all the residential members on a rate with a demand charge, and they provide options, and one of them also has time of use energy.
Did you say you were involved in the Pioneer rollout of their 3-part rate?
I was involved in developing some of the rate design options and some conversations around, the pros and cons. I was not directly involved in how they rolled that out.
Not in the implementation process?
Correct.
In your opinion, is the Pioneer experience a good template for the Southern Pioneer?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities. Of course, the staff is the same, right? So any learnings they've had is brought forward to this implementation, and how to roll that out. They've got the billing system all figured out. It's billing customers correctly for this type of a rate. They've proven it, so the technology's there, the metering's there, the education has happened. The customer base, I think, is very similar. So I think and when I've compared it to what other utilities that have implemented demand charges for residential have done, it's very similar. The materials are I feel like very well done for education and communicating it.
One last question. You mentioned the Bond Bright quote about the tyranny of the status quo. In your expert opinion, do you expect the status quo to remain the same for much longer in this area?
I mean, I think it's already moving. And for a lot of utilities, it's already moved. It's no longer the status quo. So
What about mandatory rates? Demand rates?
I see that moving as well. I think there's been a lot of reasons maybe why demand rates have taken so long to get implemented for residential. It can even just be technology. Like, we haven't always had the ability, or it was kind of cost prohibitive to have the kind of meters in place for small loads to even measure it. Well, now it's ubiquitous. AMI meters are ubiquitous. We have this data for everybody. And so more and more we're finding a need to use it because loads are becoming more diverse as well. So it just comes together. It just makes a lot of sense to be moving towards this rate. So yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people have said the two-part rate is outlived its useful life, right? And it's just a matter of how do we move on from there.
No further questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Rolford. If there is nothing further, I think, Mr. Mackey, we will thank you for your testimony and you may step down.
Thank you, Chair French.
All right. We have 3 witnesses left. We're at 11:40. Let's go off the record briefly to discuss schedule. We're off the record. Do the parties wish to plow ahead, recognizing that we're getting close to lunch, or would you rather go ahead and break now, take maybe 45 minutes for lunch, and then pick up the last 3 witnesses after lunch? Is that workable? Let me ask that.
Excuse me, Chair French, if it makes any difference to the decision-making, I note Christina Luke Fry is on the witness list. I believe she has been waived.
That's right, that's right. I am assuming Southern Pioneer is going to have material amount of cross-examination for Mr. Watkins.
I don't believe so.
Okay. The parties expect much examination of Mr. Glass.
Kirk can state, Commissioner French, Kirk can say we will have just a few questions here, Dr. Glass.
You want to just try to knock it out? All right, let's do this then. We've been going for an hour and 40 minutes. Let's give everybody a 5-minute break. Let's do 10-minute break. And then we're just going to try to knock out the last 2 witnesses after that. So at this point, let's take a 10-minute recess and we will come back at 11:50 and go back on the record.
Yeah, I need one. Thank you. I'm sorry, sir.
Go ahead, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but we've done analysis of that, but in some cases it does. Consumption. Start charging people. So now this purchasing. So they can actually increase your cost per product. But it depends. You can make it worse, right? If your peak time is the middle of the day, well, now it's worse.
Oh, yeah? Yeah? Oh, you know, it's amazing to me, I'm like, I first started in 2018. And that, the very first hearing I did was the initial remand on Evergy. And that was like, you know, seemingly, you know, kind of just this strange, like sort of offshoot issue. That everybody said, you know, this is gonna just increase, and here they are. Years later.
The third would be like a subscription. Usually what we end up calculating is 25% bucks a month. All of our smart. So it's a, so some of our clients have all three.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thanks for making the trip down.
Oh, you know, there's a lot of fun. Oh,
The one.
Sorry, you're having a lot of breaks.
So it's okay. Is it going okay? Is it helpful when people stand up and introduce themselves?
Yes. I said, Mr. Walford, I know who he is.
Okay, yeah.
I remember your face now. And
I follow instructions.
Yeah.
But I appreciate that a lot.
You would take the demand
It will make for a much better record.
Within reason. So you know that 60% of your bill is going to that's really what drives the capacity. But that if it's random and it just happens randomly, well then it's so. But if you know when that's going to set that up,
You will still have it managed.
yeah. So I'm just flying on the wall, just trying not to cause a scene.
So, but you would still have the distribution. So we got 5 minutes, 2 minutes. Oh, it is 588. Thank you. Well, I think that's exactly.
I'm trying really hard not to do that, because I've aggravated some attorneys.
Oh,
Justin gave him the note.
We're a pretty relaxed.
I don't mean to, it's just, it's not stop you quickly, it's just, when you're a horseman. Whoa. I hope he
been a long time, but I do remember that.
All right, is everyone ready? Mr. Grady? Come on. There's only one person still standing. You ready? All right, we are back on the record in today's evidentiary hearing. And we are ready for Curb to call their witness. Mr. Love.
Yes, again, Todd Love for Curb. And I just make sure, Glenn, can you hear me?
Mr. Watkins, you are on mute.
I apologize. Mr. Love, can you hear me fine now?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Glenn. Yes.
And we'll have, I know you're online, Mr. Watkins, but we're going to have the court reporter swear you in. So if you will please raise your right hand.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Could you please state your name and your business address for the record?
Yes, my name is Glenn A. Watkins. My business address is 6377 Matawan Trail, Mattawan, Mechanicsville, Virginia.
By whom and in what capacity are you employed?
I am president and senior economist of Technical Associates Incorporated.
Are you the same Glenn Watkins that caused to be filed 31 pages of direct testimony along with 3 schedules dated April 2nd, 2024?
Yes,
Are you the same Glenn Watkins that caused to be filed 12 pages of cross-answering testimony and 4 schedules on April 11th of 2024?
I am.
Do you have any changes you'd like to make to your testimony?
No, sir.
If I were to ask you the same questions today, would your answers be the same or substantially similar?
Yes,
At this point, I'd move that direct testimony and cross-answering testimony of Glenn Watkins be admitted and spread upon the record.
Any objections? Hearing none, the reference testimony will be admitted.
Thank you, and I tender the witness to examination by the parties.
All right. I've got Southern Pioneer Cross.
Yes, sir. Mr. Watkins, my name is Trevor Wolford, and I represent Southern Pioneer. I don't have too many questions for you, but this shouldn't take too long. In your testimony, you discussed the Kansas Supreme Court case, In re Westar Energy, correct?
yes, I do.
Were you involved in that case?
No, sir.
Okay. Are you aware that the commission approved a non-unanimous settlement in which the settling parties accepted a 3-part rate design? Excuse me.
That is my understanding with conversations with counsel at the curb.
And that rate design applied only to residential DG customers. Is that your recollection?
That is my understanding, yes.
Curb was a signatory to that settlement, wasn't it?
I don't know.
The Supreme Court invalidated the Westar rate because it said the rate amounted to an unlawful price discrimination in violation of a Kansas statute, and that was KSA 66117D. Is that your understanding of the case?
That's what I recall, yes.
You aren't suggesting that Southern Pioneer's proposed 3-part rate would violate that statute, are you?
I am not.
So, Southern Pioneer's rate would apply across the board, not just to DG customers, correct?
That's correct.
No rate discrimination then, right?
Not within the realm of the law, anyway.
Okay. In the Westar case, are you aware that the commission recognized the existence of a cross-subsidy favoring DG or DG adopters? Are
I'm
you
not
aware?
aware. No, sir, I'm not aware either way.
That is, the commission determined, in our view correctly, that the DG customers were subsidized by non-DG customers under the traditional two-part rate design. Yeah.
I'm not aware either way,
Okay.
sir.
Okay, you didn't read the case?
No, not in detail, no. Actually, I just perused the Supreme Court decisions.
Do you agree with the commission's conclusion in that case about cross subsidies?
With respect to what? I wasn't involved in the case, so I
Okay.
want to be helpful, but I don't know what all the issues were, so.
I absolutely understand. If you don't know, that's fine. You really, I guess you don't have knowledge of this case, correct?
Of the Westar case?
Yes.
Not intimate knowledge by any means, no.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't have any further questions then. Thank you.
All right. Commissioner questions. Commissioner Keen.
Excuse me,
Oh,
Chair.
sorry. Got a different order now. We're going to defer to staff first. Go ahead, Ms. Massentine.
Thank you. And for the benefit of the court reporter, Carly Massentine on behalf of commission staff. Good morning, Mr. Watkins. It's nice to see you again.
Yeah, good morning, Carly. Good to see you.
Could you please turn to page 7 of your direct testimony? And let me know when you're there.
Sure. Okay.
Beginning on line 17. There, you say that the 3-part rate will inhibit the adoption of distributed generation in Southern Pioneer's service territory. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you say this is because ultimately the 3-part rate will make those customers incur higher electric bills. Is that correct?
Largely, yes, with the demand charge, just because of the way that solar distributed generation is, those customers will incur a demand charge, which will tend to increase their bill.
Okay,
Whether
so,
right or wrong, I mean, it's just a matter of arithmetic.
okay, so just so I'm clear, bills will go up because under a 3-part rate structure, there will be a demand charge. Is that correct?
Generally speaking, yes.
And that demand charge reflects the reliance on the company's distribution system. Is that correct?
Well, the demand charge is based on when an individual customer's peak demand is. And because a net metering distributed generation customer tends to produce a fair amount of self-generated electricity during daylight hours, the typical residential peak is in the evening after either the sun has gone down or the solar panels are not producing as much energy as they would. So those customers will tend to peak, at a later point in time, and in which they will be subject to a demand charge and higher bills. And again, I mean, that's just a matter of physics and simple arithmetic. Whether that's right or wrong, it does not matter. I'm involved with net metering and distributed generation throughout the country in multiple jurisdictions. And the truth be known, quite often public policy trumps economics. I mean, it's as simple as that. The legislature has spoken, and that is the public policy in Kansas. Whether it's good economics or not is beside the point. The law of the land is the law of the land.
Okay, thank you. Do you believe that maintaining adequate distribution capacity to serve is a service provided by the utility for its customers?
Absolutely. And I think it's important to understand the concept of what this adequate capacity is, particularly for residential customers, because when you talk about large commercial industrial customers, you have different situations. And what I mean by that is a typical residential customer is not going to alter the way the company designs and builds most of their distribution system. When a new customer comes online or an existing customer, the way the design and engineering people are going to serve that customer from the service line to the transformer and then through the secondary and distribution systems is they are not going to try to figure out, is this person going to be on peak or off peak, whatever. They're going to put in a service line that is big enough to meet more than their anticipated possible maximum load for a number of reasons.
Sure,
Similarly,
but,
the
and sorry to cut you off here.
if I may finish my answer.
Sure.
Similarly, for the transformers and all the way through the distribution system, the way that the utilities will plan and build their system to meet capacity is based on the maximum potential, and then overbuild a little bit for economic and safety and reliability purposes.
Well, it sounds like we might be in agreement here. Do you believe that capacity maintained by the utility generally has a cost associated with it?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Okay. Who should pay for that cost?
Well, the way it's been for 120 years, customer.
And the demand charge proposed here is going to be based on an individual customer's non-coincident peak. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you agree that non-coincident peak captures the maximum usage of each individual customer in a given month?
It does, but it's not a fair price signal, in my opinion, for residential customers.
Does a non-coincident peak capture how much demand an individual user places on the distribution system in a given month?
Yes, by mathematical definition.
Are you familiar with a demand ratchet?
Very much so.
What is it?
Demand ratchets are fairly common, particularly for large commercial and industrial customers, such that your demand charge, an individual customer's demand charge in a given year will be not only the maximum, not just the maximum demand that customer used during that particular billing month, but ratcheted back usually for 11 or 12 months so that it'll be like, and it varies, but let's say 80 to 90% of your demand charge will be the current demand, maximum demand, or 80 to 90% of the maximum demand you placed on the system over the last 12 months or so. Typically, that's how it works.
Okay, thank you. Does Southern Pioneer's proposed demand charge here have a ratchet?
No, ma'am.
Without a demand ratchet, are customers able to adjust their demand month to month and thus their demand charge?
In my opinion, not really. Not residential customers. And that's because I've been doing this for 43, almost 44 years. Residential customers, first of all, as I say in my testimony, don't frankly understand the concepts of power, load versus energy. And even if they do, they have a lot more important things in their lives to whether to worry about, should I turn the dishwasher on the same time the kids are cooking or taking a bath, and I'm trying to cook dinner and wash clothes. People tend to have a lot more important things in their life than to alter tremendously not only their load, but energy usage on an instantaneous basis.
All right, thank you. That concludes my questions.
All right, now I'm going to turn to the commissioners. Commissioner Keene, do you have any questions for Mr. Watkins?
Just a couple. Good afternoon, Mr. Watkins.
Good afternoon, Commissioner.
I'm trying to look at this thing as holistically as I can and make sure that I understand exactly what it is that is your position. Is Southern Pioneer's proposed three-part residential and small general service rate structure discriminatory with respect to DG customers?
GG,
DG customers.
oh. From a technical standpoint and a purely economic standpoint, probably not. However, as I indicated in my examination from counsel from staff, in my view, that with respect to DG, this is an end around. This is a way to end around for distributed generation that is contrary to the policy of the legislature.
How so?
As I understand the statute and quote in my testimony, the legislature is desirous of promoting self-generation and distributed generation, and this will definitely impede the development of distributed generation. Will it stop it? Probably not, but it will not. It certainly will not support the future and development of distributed generation.
Well, if in fact it is non-discriminatory, as you have, I believe, testified it's not, how then is it going to be, have the deleterious effect of discouraging DG utilization?
Simply because those customers' electric bills will go up, and then they will know in their decision-making whether they do or don't want to install solar generation, because it will not be economic. So fewer people will install rooftop solar.
Have you been present throughout the previous testimony of prior witnesses this morning?
Yes, sir.
We have testimony, and I'm going to probably overgeneralize it. If you believe that's the case, you can certainly correct me, but I would appreciate your take on the contention I think that the company is making, and I believe the staff has also agreed to, and that is that with respect to cost allocation, those who create cost causation should bear those costs. Do you agree or disagree with that?
To a limited degree. And what I mean by that is, Your Honor, think about the way that we design rates. When we do a cost allocation study across classes, we recognize the load factors, the loads, the energy, and the cost imposed by different classes. And that's exactly why that the residential rates, two-part rates currently, are more expensive or higher than commercial and industrial rates. Now, once those costs that need to be recovered through the cost allocation study are known, and you know how much revenue needs to be collected, in this instance from the residential class, the current way we've been doing this for over 100 years is a two-part rate. The utility will have every opportunity to recover those costs, and with partially through a customer charge and partially through an energy charge. And then in this case, the company has been talking about intra-class inequities. And as far as that goes, every customer has a unique cost structure. But when we design rates, it's a matter of a lot of averaging. As I point out in my testimony, it's a reasonable assumption to say that it costs more to serve a rural customer than an urban customer, but we don't differentiate the two. And in all of my years, I have never heard a single residential customer complain that they're paying more than their neighbor because of the two-part rate. Customers understand it, they accept it, and it's been used well for 120 years. So that's my take on cost allocations and cost causations, Your Honor.
Okay. I'm trying to conceptually tie all these things together, and I'm I guess I'm having some difficulty trying to determine how it is that if this three-part rate design is not discriminatory with regard to the DG, pardon me, part of the residential class, how is it then that those people who are in that class, they're in that class for a reason, I'm going to suspect. And I suspect those are good reasons. But they go in there, would they not go into that part of the class not realizing what cost causation issues go with that? And if they realize those cost causation issues follow their choice and the rate design is non-discriminatory, how are the DG customers harmed?
From a purely economic and technical perspective, there is good probability that those customers are taking advantage of the system. If you want to use the word subsidized, that's fine. It's been my experience, however, that distributed generation customers in the residential class tend to be higher income, larger homes, obviously. And in a Georgia case that was just in 2020, late 2022, we did a detailed analysis of distributed generation customers, and we found that those customers still contributed a lot of revenue to the utility, even though that they self-generated some, and they had a lot of net generation that they received back as credits, but they still contributed a significant amount, towards fixed cost, if you want to do that, but contributed a significant level of revenues. But again, two things. We've discussed, the policy of the legislature, but if I may, we're talking about such a minuscule amount of distributed generation customers on this system. What was it, 35 customers, I believe it is. Rate design is a matter of averaging. Everything's not going to be perfect. And so with this averaging, there's going to be some winners and there's going to be some losers from a technical perspective. The way that the law is in Kansas, there's a good likelihood that net metering customers are some of the winners. But that's a matter of public policy, not economics or really within the purview of the commission, as I understand. I hope that answers your question.
Is it not one of the principal overriding tasks of this commission to serve as an economic regulator? Is that not one of our tasks?
That's my understanding, Your Honor.
Okay. So I guess my question would be, if in the absence of the three-part rate design, we have this subsidy of DG customers, as you've suggested could exist, how is that fair to the non-DG class in terms of cost allocation?
The way I think the best way for me to respond to that, Your Honor, is that's nothing more than throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
I don't know what that means.
There are approximately 35 distributed generation residential customers out of over 11,000. If we're going to set state policy based on such a minuscule amount and worry to death over that at the expense of the other 11,000 customers, in my view, that's not good public policy nor good economic reasoning.
Okay, here's my last question with respect to the DG class then. Just please explain to me, for the record here, how and why this proposed $3 per month demand charge is punitive, excessive, or unreasonable.
I set forth the reasons in quite a bit of detail in my testimony. But to summarize, Your Honor, first of all, this is a non-coincident peak demand charge. And while that may fit well for large industrial customers because they can influence actually how the system is designed, for residential customers, and as acknowledged by Witness Mackey, there's a lot of diversity within the residential class. So you have a household that may peak at 6 o'clock in the evening, and then you have their next door neighbor that's on third shift. They might peak at midnight, and then you have another young professional that works late and may peak at 8 o'clock. Well, the entire system benefits from that. But those customers are going to be paying based on when their maximum load is, even if it's on an off-peak period. That's one reason. The other reason is customers, frankly, don't want this. And in a competitive environment, we know that competition will serve what the customers want. I have never seen a residential customer say, I want a demand charge. And the proof is in the pudding. You know, around the country, there are many, many dozens of utilities that offer optional time of use and demand rates. And the participation, particularly in the optional demand rates, are almost non-existent. And in fact, many utilities have done away with those optional because there's no participation. Customers just don't want that, at least residential customers.
My last question has to do with the other objection that CURB is raising to the proposed rate design by the company, and that has to do with the customer charge. So I would ask you a question analogous to the one I did with respect to the demand charges. How and why is the proposed $2 per month customer charge either punitive, excessive, or unreasonable?
Well, as set forth in my testimony, Your Honor, it is excessive. In fact, on the customer cost analysis that I conducted, the current rate exceeds what would be a reasonable customer charge. But in the interest of gradualism and rate continuity, I recommend that we maintain the current rate.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Watkins, for your indulgence of my questions. I have no further questions of this witness.
Commissioner Keither, do you have questions?
No.
Mr. Watkins, I'll just ask you a couple general questions. Do you agree with the emergence of new trends like electric vehicles, distributed generation, electrification, that it is necessary for utilities to be looking at transitional or outside the box rate designs that will better allocate costs to these diverse load types?
Absolutely. I'm involved throughout the country. In fact, I'll be filing testimony next week in a Pennsylvania case involving Duquesne Light, in which we are designing rates, time of use rates at the distribution level, because in Pennsylvania, you know, they're not vertically integrated. Anyway, we are designing rates for electric time of use vehicles. I work in Maryland. We did the same thing there. I work exclusively for all cases in Delaware for their electric. We have electric vehicle time of use rates. In Washington State, I represent the commission staff, and for Puget Sound and Avista, the two largest utilities, we have developed rates specifically to address electric vehicles. As far as distributed generation goes, Your Honor, quite frankly, the statutes have trumped rate making in that right, wrong, or indifferent, the statutes sort of limit the regulatory authority's ability to address that perhaps in the most economically appropriate manner.
Well, I don't think I'm going to touch the discussion of the statutes, but maybe a general observation. Would it be fair to say that the position you're taking in this case is that these new demands on the system do legitimately warrant utilities and regulators looking at new rate options? But at least as I understand your testimony, you just don't believe this particular option is flexible or nuanced enough to send the correct price signals to customers. Is that a good summation?
I believe it absolutely is, Your Honor. You know, in Arizona, I work in Arizona and in Nevada, and solar generation is huge out there, as you might imagine, not only because of being in a desert climate, but also because of a lot of the sparsely populated areas. And in Arizona, the company, both Tucson Electric and Arizona Public Service, proposed demand charges, and there was an uproar. However, the commission in Arizona was very much aware of the issues and the problems, and they have gone to time of use rates. And every utility is different, but I couldn't agree more. We are in a changing environment, and it's always good to look at innovative ideas. Unfortunately, the traditional three-part demand charge based on non-coincident peak demand just is not the way to go for residential customers.
Is it an either or between demand charges and time of use rates? Because time of use rates, at least in my observation, don't seem to be terribly popular either as a mandatory option. Is there an option of a demand charge that is somehow targeted toward peak hours, even if it's not the exact monthly coincident peak? Are there other options out there that you've seen looking across the country?
Yes, I have. First of all, I agree with Mr. Mackey in that, well, first of all, I'm an advocate of time of use pricing. I am. But I do agree with Mr. Mackey that time of use pricing is more attuned and adept towards the generation side than the distribution side. With that being said, what I have seen around, and not for residential, there's not a single regulatory commission in the country that has mandatory demand charges for residential customers. So I'm speaking mostly towards commercial and industrial. I'm seeing demand charges based only on peak, on your load during the peak period, a peak predefined peak period. Say, you know, and it varies, of course, but say from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. That load during that. Whatever your load is during off-peak periods, it doesn't matter. And then also a tried and true industrial rate that's very confusing to novices is what's known as time of, not time of use, but energy use demand blocking. So in other words, the ultimate price you pay is based on your load factor, and your load factor, of course, is the relationship between your energy usage and your demand usage. I've never seen that employed for even a small commercial customer, but those are two that come to mind, Your Honor.
Well, thank you. I don't believe I have any more questions, but I appreciate the opportunity to draw on your experience. With that, have either of the commissioners developed additional questions? All right, then at this time, we've got no more commissioner questions. We will do an opportunity for redirect for Curb if you have any.
Curb does not have any at this time.
Okay, thank you. Well, with that, Mr. Watkins, you may step down virtually. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
All right, we now turn to our final witness. Staff, you may call your witness.
Huh? Yeah. Hold on.
And Mr. Oh, there we go.
Staff calls Dr. Robert Glass to the stand.
Sit or stand, please.
Whatever you prefer.
Okay.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Dr. Glass. Would you, I know I've stated it previously, but would you please state your name and your title for the record?
Robert H. Glass, and my title is Chief of Economics and Rates at the, as part of the Utilities Division at the KCC.
Could you please state your business address for the record?
1500 Southwest Arrowhead Road, Topeka, Kansas, 66604.
Thank you. Are you the same Dr. Robert Glass who filed direct testimony in this docket on April 2nd, 2024?
Yes,
And do you have any corrections to make to that testimony?
yes, I do. On page 38, there's a table, table 11. And if you go into that table, there's present rates, and then it says water pumping service, and it's municipal rate. It should say municipal rate instead of water pumping service. Copy and paste got a little out of control.
Okay, thank you. And are you the same Dr. Robert Glass who filed supplemental direct testimony in the record on April 9th, 2024?
Yes,
At this time, staff would move for both the direct testimony and supplemental testimony of Dr. Robert Glass to be admitted into the evidentiary record.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, the reference testimonies will be admitted.
Thank you. With that, staff tenders the witness for cross-examination.
All right. I believe I have Citizens Utility Ratepayer Board first.
And Todd Love. Dr. Glass, good afternoon.
good afternoon.
Just a couple of questions. On page 18, line.
Mr. Love, is your mic on?
Oh,
Just make sure you're speaking into it.
okay, sorry. On page 18, line 2, you posed the question, how have residential customers traditionally paid for capacity? Your answer is the traditional residential customers had a two-part rate, a customer charge to pay for the fixed costs of equipment to get the energy to the customer from the distribution system, and an energy or delivery charge for the electricity provided to the customer. Customer charge is fixed charge monthly, while the energy charge is a per kilowatt hour charge that varies with usage. Is that correct?
Yes,
So that's been the traditional way of collecting rates for the last over 100 years. Is that correct?
that's been the dominant method, yes.
On page 18, line 14, you posed the question, what has changed to make the collection of capacity costs and the energy charge predominantly problematic today? Your answer is if the customer installs solar generation, their capacity requirements do not change much, but their energy consumption from the electric utility declines substantially. Therefore, customers with solar generation are not paying their fair share of the capacity when residential revenue is only collecting using customer and energy charges. Is that correct statement?
Yes,
So would you say that the demand charge that we're discussing here today is geared considerably towards DG?
well, that's one of the primary reasons. It's not the only, but that's one of the primary,
Is one of the primary regions.
yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Southern Pioneer, any questions for Mr. Glass?
We're friendly.
Okay. Commissioner questions. Commissioner Keen?
Afternoon, Dr. Glass.
Afternoon,
It's been a while. Nice to see you.
good to see you too.
I'm going to kind of cut to the chase here and ask you a very general overview question and have you respond to that as you see fit. When I look at the conclusions that I see in your pre-filed testimony, focusing on actually recommendations number 1 and 2 that you're making to the commission. Bob, this is found on page 51 and top of page 52. First recommendation is that the commission approve Southern Pioneer's request to transition with a revenue neutral approach from the current residential GSS classes to the proposed single and three-phase classes. And the second recommendation is that the commission approve Southern Pioneer's increased customer charge. I believe that would be the $2 per month charge, and the addition of the $3 per kW demand charge for single and three-phase classes. You've been here, have you not, for the testimony that preceded your testimony this morning on this particular matter? What I would appreciate is, in a general sense, kind of distilling the essence of your testimony for my benefit, for the benefit of the commission. Why is it that you believe that if the commission adopts these recommendations, that these proposals would not be punitive, excessive, or unreasonable?
Well, the customer charge, the increase in the customer charge is within the bounds of both staff's class cost of service and Southern Pioneer's class cost of service. So it passes the cost causation part of it. The fact that it would be more than, as was pointed out earlier, than either Empire, which is $14, or Evergy, which is $14.25 spread everywhere in Evergy in Kansas. I think that the factor that makes the 1667 make sense for Southern Pioneer is it's an expensive utility. They inherited Aquila's infrastructure, and they've had to spend, this is just conversations I've had with Southern Pioneer over the last 12, 14 years. But, for example, Southern Pioneer was not collecting any money from Liberal for back to the 1990s for their lighting. They just didn't get it done. They had meters that didn't work. They have lines. I remember a guy telling me, he said, we had a line that was almost touching the ground in the summer. That's dangerous. They had a lot of O&M that they had to do on that Aquila system. That's the reason it's expensive. Because the system is that expensive, a higher customer charge makes some sense. 1667 is just a $2 increase. That's the decision they made. I would say if you went to $15, I don't think there'd be a lot of objection. If you went to $14, I mean, the customer charge itself, should probably be around $16.67. That's reasonable. I don't think it's excessive. It's not punitive. Now, the demand charge, as Mr. Watkins said, the math works out, and in terms of math, it's appropriate. The question is it punitive? If you're asking people to pay costs that they're generating, I don't see how that's punitive. I don't think that adding a demand charge, especially a $3 demand charge, necessarily will stop a lot of people from putting solar panels on. I would think if you eliminated the federal subsidies for it, that would have a much bigger effect. The solar panels themselves, I do remember Mr. Watkins saying that statute says that, you do it, right? That's not what the statute says. The statute says you want the best use of natural resources in Kansas. And there are a couple of places in that statute where if renewable, at that time, wind was the concern, if wind was too expensive, then you had to justify it or eliminate the generation of wind. So the statute doesn't say solar at any cost. It says solar, that results in the best use of natural resources. And so asking residential customers that put solar on their rooftops to pay for the cost that they're putting on the system doesn't seem punitive to me. And I doubt that it's going to have, asking people to pay the costs that they're causing shouldn't dramatically, well, it's optimal. It's the best use of resources. So that would be my answer to that.
I don't believe I have any other questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Keither.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm sitting here thinking about all of the conversations that are going on about the use of solar, period, in and around the state of Kansas, and what kind of roadblocks it's starting to run into. And raises the question, I guess, what kind of trouble does that cause when we're talking about advancing another charge? I don't know if you can really answer that or not, but it's something that
Yeah,
seems to be a problem.
I think that the federal subsidy is more important in terms, because it hits very quickly and because it's large. The other factor, though, is you have to have substantial income to really take full advantage of that. That's one of the problems with solar, electric vehicles, even energy efficiency. They're always aimed at upper income. They're not intentional. That's not intentional. I don't mean to say that it just ends up that way. I don't think it would provide a substantial roadblock. And actually, and this is personal opinion, this isn't staff opinion, personal opinion. Solar done by a utility where they can have a large project, use the latest technology, rotate the panels so they follow the sun, is 2 to 4 times more efficient than rooftop solar. I would think that if you wanted to support solar, and if that's the reason you're putting it on your rooftops, it would be advantageous for Southern Pioneer to set up a community solar program and allow these people to participate in that, so they're participating in a more efficient use of solar energy. But that's my opinion. That's not staff's opinion.
Thank you.
I don't know how you get away differentiating those.
Because I report to other people.
I think just a couple general questions. Is your support of this mandatory NCP demand charge in this docket for this company, would you consider that to be applicable to other utilities in the state? I mean, is it an indication that if Evergy or Liberty came in before us and said, we want to replicate that exact same thing, is it an indication that you would support that, or would you need to see additional evidence?
Well, you'd always want to see additional evidence. Okay. But there is a specific reason for the non-CP, and that's because it's distributional. Evergy's not a distributional utility, and neither is Empire or Liberty, excuse me. That's how old I am. And so it does not track to either the problems that Evergy has or the problems that Empire has. It's actually probably closer to Empire because Empire is a winter peaking utility, and they're a winter peaking utility because of space heating. Westar for years, back to at least the 1990s, and maybe it was with KPL back into the 80s, had a 3-part rate for space heating customers, and they had over 10,000 customers on that. and they used a non-coincidental peak. And it was specifically because space heating tends to peak early in the morning when people get up, take a shower, etc. So if you're winter peaking, you have a lot of space heating. So it would make sense for Liberty to think about that possibility. But there are myriad of ways to deal with these problems. One of the problems, by the way, with using time of use is that because of, if we look at California, because California tells you what's going to happen in the next 10 years, basically. What have they found out with all the solar that Arnold Schwarzenegger had them put in, subsidized, dramatically subsidized, and they've continued to put in? What's been the net result? Well, they've changed behavior during the day. You can't turn the solar off that's on the rooftops. So you end up turning off the solar that the utilities are using, which is, more efficient. It's a bizarre situation that they have. They also have to turn it off because they're going to have natural gas at night. You just need natural gas at night. They spent tons of money on solar, on batteries, but the batteries can't perform like natural gas. Natural gas is just really nice. And so
When the fuel is there.
What?
When the fuel is there.
yeah, well, yeah, if you can't get it through the pipes, it kind of sucks. Anyhow, back to California. So you have a dramatic effect, right? And if you look forward, what's going to happen? Okay, the future, at least given present political situation, the future is $7,500 subsidy for EVs. That's enormous. As soon as Detroit figures out how to make a little cheaper EV, they will be selling those. That's just a monster, and it goes up to $400,000. Or if you're a family of two, it goes up to $800,000. They really are taking care of the low income. So you're going to have EVs. They're going to charge at home. That's going to increase. There's a movement for electric space heating. I don't think it's going to be near as universal as people would like. Mr. Mackey can tell you what happened in Minneapolis and Minnesota, but I did remember that there was initially a survey and 95% of the people in Minnesota said, we'll stick with the gas. So you're going to have changes, and when the peak is, so time of use 4 to 8 is not going to make a lot of sense necessarily. So you need flexibility, and as much as people may hate a demand charge, nobody wants real-time pricing but that 1% that are bizarre economists.
Dynamic pricing.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm kind of going down that path, but changing a little bit, because you've got some statements that directly address some of the concerns I have about not looking at the timing of peaks. It's actually page 20 of your direct testimony, and lines 12 through 15. I think that directly addresses the issue. And you say, the required distributional capacity may be more in some areas of the system at off-peak times rather than on-peak system times. And since Southern Pioneer's concern is demand in the system's distribution system, the appropriate demand charge is a non-coincident peak demand charge. And I'm going to try to interpret that in my own words, and you can tell me if I'm getting it right or wrong. I think what you're saying here is that on the distribution system, different substations, perhaps ones located near a residential area, are going to hit a different peak and be built out to a different peak than the substations for the system as a whole that might be responding more to, industrial activity. Is that generally what you're trying to get out there, is that they are going to be built out to sort of different peaks because the peaks hit different in maybe a residential area?
Right,
Yeah.
yes. And a residential area that has space heating, a lot of space heating. If you go into a subdivision, if natural gas doesn't get in there, then you have all space heating. So you can have a subdivision that has a unique peak relative to even other close subdivisions where there's natural gas heat. So the nice thing about a demand charge, and there's been a lot of talk about the problem. I'm not saying that they don't scare people and people don't like them, and yeah, nobody wants to pay for anything. But the nice thing is it individualizes rate design to the customer. It's like the energy charge. If you use a lot of energy, you pay more. If you use less energy, you pay less. You pay the customer charge whether you're at home or not. You pay the customer charge. If you're gone, and there was a guy that complained about his rates, and he was in Europe for 2 months and he had to pay the customer charge. That meter didn't leave. The meter stayed there. It didn't go to Europe with him. So you have to, you can individualize with a demand charge or you can't with a customer charge. That's the reason I refer to it as a quasi-fixed charge, because you can also control it. When we were thinking about demand charges 10 years ago, I talked to Butler Co-op, because Butler was the first to put in a demand charge, a mandatory demand charge in Kansas. And so I asked the guy, I said, did you have problems? He said, yeah, we had some problems. Had a woman call me up at 3 o'clock, one day and scream at me that her bill was 40% higher. And so I explained to her why and everything. And I said, now here are the things you can do to lower that. And so, yeah, she got her bill down. The people that care will get their bill down. The people that don't care will be on average pay and they'll just behave as they have before. So you can individualize it. And one of the things that Butler, Butler had coincidental peak. One of the reasons that they really like it, and they still have it, I suppose, is because they buy all their energy and they were able to reduce their peak demand by 20%. So you can individualize a demand charge and successfully deal with problems.
I think that's what I'm trying to understand, is why Southern Pioneer doesn't care about managing these loads. It sounds to me like you're saying, well, they don't know exactly which, geographical peaks are causing build out, and so we're going to throw our hands up and we're going to use an NCP. Evergy is very concerned about managing things like EV charging and making sure it happens at the right time. And I think what I'm hearing you say is, well, Evergy is a fully integrated utility, and so they care about their energy, how much their energy costs at different times, and when they have to pay peak pricing for wholesale energy. But Southern Pioneer doesn't care because they're a distribution only utility. But I guess my disconnect is they still have to procure a certain amount of power and they're still allocated a certain amount of power. So wouldn't they have the same incentives to want to manage and push things like EV charging or other loads to off-peak times?
I'm not exactly familiar with the details of how their load varies during the week, during the day, during the month, or during the season, during the year. Their rate design, the structure of their rate design is such that, well, I know they get their energy from sunflower. And I believe there's a demand charge on there. And then the transmission, there is a transmission charge. And I believe that there's a demand charge on that transmission charge. So in some sense, that's already in place. Now, if you wanted to get back to the customers, well, they don't have to do much about transmission. And if you want to have them reduce the peak, yeah, you could do that. You could have a peak demand. I don't think you want two demand charges. One is going to be trouble enough. So you can have time of use with demand. Evergy had that in one of their rate designs. I think they eventually eliminated it, but they did have it when they proposed it back in 2018, I believe. And they do fit together. And then you have the question of how complex you want to make it for customers. And I might point out that as unhappy as some customers are with the demand charge, the default, not mandatory, but default time of use that was proposed in Missouri that Evergy has to deal with was not popular. And the utilities, all of the utilities were dreading putting it in place. I'd like to say there's an easy answer, there's a silver bullet, or that there's a jump you can make to get to the easy, simple answer. I don't know of one.
Yeah, I think you're probably making the point I'm driving at, and that's, I guess you always remind us in testimony that rate design is an art, not a science, and there was a broad zone of reasonable rates. And I guess the question for you is, are the rates that are proposed here the only just and reasonable rates, or are there other rate designs that staff could potentially support as just and reasonable?
Yeah, staff thinks what's proposed is just and reasonable. I think that the most important thing is the institution of the three-part rate. Staff would really like to see this tried in something other than a co-op, but not at Evergy, if that makes any sense.
You mentioned the name of a utility earlier, where you said you wanted it.
Yeah. Well, no, I said that it would make sense. I don't like to tell utilities what their rate design should look like. They tend to get upset about that.
Is the current traditional rate design so egregious that the commission should view it as unjust and unreasonable? Or is this a case of trying to walk into given the limited number of customers that this might apply to, trying to walk into something for the future? So I guess, yeah, is the current rate design, if maintained for some short period, is it so egregious to be unjust and unreasonable?
So if you go back to residential, you don't go to single phase and three phase. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting nuance. I was really just talking about maintaining a two-part rate versus implementing a three-part rate.
Well, the two-part rate is probably subsidizing space heating customers, and there are a lot more of those. There are 357 or something like that are full-time, I mean, all 12 months. Although 91 of those never get to the space heating discount. So they never use 800 kilowatt hours in a winter month, but they're on that. This is the holdover from Aquila. I mean, I don't want to trash how bad Aquila ran stuff, but there's a reason that they're bankrupt, or they basically went bankrupt. So space heating is a problem. DG is a problem, and you're going to have electric vehicles. I mean, there's going to be the need for change
Yeah.
in the future. And the future is, I don't know how far off. I have a hard time seeing more than a year, and maybe less at different times. And I'm not a great forecaster. I mean, I've lost bottles of scotch on elections. And I mean, and not close elections. I said somebody get 45%, and no, they didn't. So I'm not good at forecasting what the future is. That uncertainty suggests to me that it's probably not going to look like it does now.
We won't ask you about any upcoming elections. That's all I have for you. Any more questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Keen.
As best I recall, I believe I've supported some of the same candidates you have, but I didn't lose scotch. I wasn't aggressive enough to do that. As we look back on some of the recent Supreme Court cases that have dealt with demand charge issues, and as we look out prospectively, I think as Chair French has, and as you have in your response to your testimony in response to his questions, whether I should or not, I'm going to ask you this final question. I'm the grandson of a carpenter, and I've frequently been accused of following in his footsteps by overhammering nails. By analogy, I may be doing that here, but I think I just would like to have it on the record with some specificity from you. Is the Southern Pioneer proposed three-part residential and general service rate structure discriminatory with regard to DG customers?
No,
Why?
because if their rates go up, it's because you're reducing the subsidy they're receiving from other customers. If all you're doing, you're not asking them to pay all of the capacity that they're demanding. You're only asking them to pay half. Or our cost of service says it's a little more, that $3 is a little more than half. Theirs says it's a little less than half. So you're not asking them to pay full price for that capacity. So you're not even eliminating the subsidy. You're not fully eliminating the subsidy. You're just cutting into it. And if they move incrementally, they'll probably be moving about the pace of inflation. And so, I would doubt that they're going to ever really eliminate the subsidy. And by the way, pinpointing exactly how big that subsidy is, it's a fool's errand. I mean, it's there, it's pretty good size right now. This would cut it significantly. It's still going to probably exist. And the small part that exists, I think you have to live with that. And we're not supposed to take into account externalities. The legislature basically said, don't think about externalities. I'm an economist. I think about externalities. A lot of the externalities for environmental goods have been internalized because they've had to put on scrubbers, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. And that's making utilities pay the cost and reduce the pollution. So it's been internalized. Not all of them have. Solar also, minutely reduces that. So a minute subsidy doesn't matter. I want fairer rates. I don't want the perfect rates because I'm not smart enough, and I don't know many people that are. I don't know anybody actually who's smart enough to nail the perfect rates. I just want good rates. And I think that, and I want to better the rates. And I think that moving in this direction makes the rates better. It reduces the subsidy. It's not going to discourage. I mean, as long as we're not dealing with the federal subsidy, that's much more dominant. So I don't think it's going to discourage putting solar on rooftops. So it just seems like it's a good move in the right direction, moving to the 3-part rate. If it isn't, then in 2 years or whenever, when they get, when people are upset about it, they can change, they can move back. And they're not a co-op, but they're real close, right? I mean, they're out there. I mean, Liberal is a big city. I mean, it's almost 20,000.
Yes.
So, and they also have Meade, which is my least favorite city in Kansas, because they have a speed trap out there. It goes 65, 55, 45, 35, 25, within the space of about 300 yards. And my wife got a ticket at 2 o'clock in the morning. So, okay, that's irrelevant. But Liberal is a pretty good sized city.
Big.
And so I think it's fair for them. I think it's fair for the other customers. And it's just moving in a better direction.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Bob. I have no further questions.
I don't have any questions now that we've got your least favorite city and your wife's driving habits memorialized in the official transcript. With that, we will go to staff's redirect, if you have any.
I have just a couple questions, thank you. Dr. Glass, I want to take us back to a discussion of the Westar remand docket that's been the subject of some earlier discussion here today. You're fairly familiar with that case, are you not?
Yes,
You and I think, both worked that case back in 2020.
yes.
Would you say, in addition to the goal of reducing the subsidy, well, I want to go back to sort of the rationale and the focus on discrimination in this context. The court there said that as long as all customers were on a 3-part rate, there wouldn't be discrimination. Is that correct?
Yes,
It was simply the issue there was that the 3-part rate only applied to the DG customers, whereas the remaining residential customers stayed on a 2-part rate, correct?
correct.
Okay. And I wanted to go back to staff's class cost of service. Do you recall what number staff estimated to be a accurate customer charge that Southern Pioneer would need to levy in order to recover its full cost?
I can give you it's either 1836, I think, or 1839. It's 18 plus a little bit, 18 plus change, $18 plus change.
So roughly approximately $2 higher than what Southern Pioneer proposed.
Yes.
Okay. And same question, but for the demand charge. So in staff's class cost of service, do you recall what staff estimated the demand charge should be in order for Southern Pioneer to recover its full distribution capacity cost?
Slightly more than $5.
Okay. Thank you. That concludes my redirect.
All right. With that, I think we have concluded your testimony, Mr. Glass, and you may step down. We thank you.
Thank you.
All right. This concludes all of the witness examinations. Trying to remember if I do have one additional item. There was no motion to formally admit all of the other pre-filed testimony into the record. Is it the party's intention that the commission admit all of the pre-filed testimonies, including the witnesses that were not here before us today, into the formal record?
Carly Massentine on behalf of staff. Yes, my understanding is that that is the party's intention.
Okay. If there's no objection, I will just go ahead and note that for the record. It's a formality. Everything under our regulations that is filed is part of the official record, but we like to go ahead and admit it. With that, are there any other final items from the parties? Seeing nothing, this does conclude our evidentiary hearing in this matter. As a reminder, the briefing schedule is as follows. Southern Pioneer's post-hearing brief is due June 14th. Staff and the interveners' briefs are due June 26th, and Southern Pioneer's reply brief is due July 2nd. And a commission order in this docket is due by July 30th. So unless I got that wrong, and I'm not seeing any hands waving, that is all that I have for you. And if there are no further matters to come before us, we are now adjourned. Thank you.